Welcome to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we explore the strategies, the insights, and the best practices that help families and their advisors build and manage successful family offices. I am your host, Christi Van Rite, and each episode we dive into the key elements of running a family office. Whether you're a family looking to structure your advisory team for long-term success, or you're a professional managing the complexities of a multi-generational enterprise. From financial oversight and operational efficiency to selecting the right advisors and creating a lasting legacy, this podcast is here to provide practical guidance and expert perspectives. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we talk all things family office. Today's conversation, I think you're going to find extremely interesting. If you have ever considered what it might look like if you not only traveled to another country, but maybe lived in another country. What is that process? What does that look like? How do you even start to think about how to make that happen? That's exactly what today's conversation is all about. So with that, I'd like to welcome Simon Gabbay with Henley and Partners. And this is exactly the work that he and his firm focuses on. So, Simon, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Christy. It's great to be part of the Family Office Success podcast.
Nice to have you. So, give us a little bit of just a brief introduction about yourself and your work, and then we have so much to cover. We're going to dive right into it after that.
Yeah, of course. No, it's exciting. Lots of different topics, of course. So my background, I've been with Henley for quite some time now. Initially, I'm from Montreal, a very small city, considered, of course, compared to Canada and compared to, let's say, Toronto and some other places as well. Relocated to the US to really help with our expansion in terms of really this surging demand that has been happening here, and formerly based out of Miami, and I'm a director of private clients, and I oversee, of course, various markets for my firm, and of course, advise families on essentially exploring second citizenship and residency by investment.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about why, first of all, you literally said it in your introduction, you came here to help push the office forward here in the States. Why do you think citizenship and residency programs are coming up more often now than maybe in past history?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. So what I would say is, interestingly enough, I would say maybe about 15 years or so, this whole industry started way before. I would say 15 years ago. It really started about 35 years ago in a very small country called St. Kitts and Nevis, which really pioneered the citizenship and residency by investment industry. It all started where, of course, countries were looking for foreign investments to essentially grow specific economic sectors. And at that point, they had strong citizenships where it was very attractive, mostly to, I would say, founders or even entrepreneurs that had global businesses, and they were specifically interested in traveling to other specific countries, either for their family or even for themselves. And they wanted to offer also educational opportunities for their children as well. So they would participate a part of really these specific programs to then give them access to a significance of other countries. And the reason why is because they would come from these underdeveloped countries where they would have poor passports. And what I mean by this is more in terms of what we call visa-free access. So this is where a country will have a friendly relationship with another country, where it will allow its citizens to travel freely to another country without applying for a visa and going through the process and so forth and on. And unfortunately, many of them would only have, let's say, access to 50 different countries that wouldn't be as attractive either for their businesses or for themselves. And they would participate and invest into some other countries and give them access to 150 more plus countries. And that really brought this attraction. And over the last maybe 15 years, this is what I mentioned before, is we've seen a transition in the market where now we're seeing really Americans becoming the number one nationality that is inquiring about second citizenship and second residency. And for so many different reasons, either Sometimes it can be political shifts, economic shifts as well. It can also be also in terms of tax reforms, which of course we're seeing this a little bit in America. But now we're seeing this mostly as an approach of a plan B versus looking for a stronger citizenship to what individual used to look at it from, let's say, 15 years ago.
So, talk to us a little bit about the broader Plan B.
Sure. So the approach has always been where families that have their ongoing life affairs and they have a specific interest of wanting to build an insurance policy. They're not interested in relocating their life. They're not interested in relocating their families. They're not interested in, restarting, let's say, quote unquote, from scratch. So what they do is they look for really these specific programs that allows them to get an insurance policy, that allows them to really build an edge against um, unforeseeable risks that could happen as well.
Mm.
And for them, it's becoming now an important asset, not only a part of their family discussion, but also a part of wealth management planning, where for some of them, they look at it as either a tax benefit, they look at it also in terms of accessing further jurisdictions for many different reasons. And this is why this plan B has been coming into a conversation nowadays more popular than it was before.
So, you mentioned the programs. Talk to us a little bit about what that means. Are there different programs based on what you're willing to invest in that country? Are they based on what you're trying to do, like if you want to move or if you're going for education?
Yeah, of course. So typically, what I would say is with a lot of these different types of programs, some of them will offer the benefit of having access to a citizenship, which essentially is a second passport, or others will be residency. And often I'll use the term CBI and RBI, which is residency and citizenship by investment. Many of these programs will offer either the opportunity to get a second citizenship in a very short time frame. Typically, this traditionally depends in terms of exploring some given specific jurisdictions that allow for this short-term time frame. One thing that I like to highlight, which I think it would be important for the audience to kind of clarify, is really the importance of understanding really what is citizenship and residency. Because often, I hear that some people get confused about it. And this is
Right.
where we have to bring this education, right? And for a lot of them, it clears a lot in terms of what does one mean versus another. So typically with a residency, which in the US, we often call it a green card, but essentially it's a permanent residency card where it allows for one to reside in a country, to also have the opportunity to work, have access to the education, in addition to as well having access to the healthcare market. Now, more often, residency comes with various conditions. Sometimes
Mm.
it can be physical presence, meaning that some individuals need to spend a certain amount of time in a country, which may be a factor that some are considering that is not as interesting, and others do not want that. And then another condition can also be in terms of tax residency, which basically means that if in most other countries, if one individual does live for more or reside for more than a 6 month period over the course of a 12-month calendar year, then they may effectively become a tax resident of that country. So then they start paying double taxes in two different jurisdictions, which complicates a lot of different things, right? And
Indeed, indeed.
here we go. And then what we do is then we look at citizenship. So citizenship, it will often encompass all the benefits that residency offers.
Right.
But also, on a different level, is that this is really the only international travel document that is recognized. Meaning that is, if we're looking at it from an insurance perspective, often a residency can only be as effective when one individual arrives to the country where they have a residency. But having that second citizenship really benefits in terms of an insurance policy from one perspective, being in another country. And the reason why it's that you also gain the protection from what we call another sovereign state, which effectively allows to utilize consular services in the country where, of course, you do reside, and of course, leave your country with that second best citizenship as well. So, a couple of different things that I wanted to put all together, so at least there's a clear understanding of both aspects as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So there are different benefits based on what the family's ultimate goal is,
Always,
effective,
always.
effectively.
Yeah, and I would say that these are important factors to consider because often we'll have different clients that will come with their own their own motivations, their own drivers, and
Sure.
we always want to understand exactly what are some of these different factors that we need to consider to either aim for a citizenship by investment program or a residency by investment program because both will deliver completely different benefits to what a family are looking to consider.
Interesting. So it's no longer is it just I want to be able to travel to other countries that maybe my visa won't get me to. It's really a much more broad conversation
Oh yeah.
for a number of reasons, not just geopolitical uncertainty, but lifestyle and all kinds of things. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. Now it became
Okay.
this holistic approach where we're really looking to cover so many different topics and so many different factors of life that really has never been considered before. And this is only because of various drivers that have led to these concerns that have arisen today to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
clients that are coming to us and they're saying, we are looking for a plan B. We are looking for an exit plan. We are looking for something that
Yeah.
I don't want to be waking up the next day feeling like, something has happened and I don't have it in my back pocket yet, or so forth and on.
Right.
It's a much bigger discussion, of course, than what it used to be, let's say 15 years ago.
So, what are I'm going to say typical, though I know that that is not probably the actual case, um, investment thresholds that a family, if a family is interested in having a conversation, whether it's citizenship or residency, what are some of those kind of those thresholds or those investment bands, if you will, and effort that it might take, not necessarily, by each program, but just in general? Like if a family is coming to you and saying, we're interested in having this conversation, what are some of those baseline expectations that you would want them to know coming into that conversation with you?
Sure, sure. So often, what I see from clients is they do a bit of a preliminary research before they really come on a call because there's so many different countries that, offer citizenship and residency by investment program where as of today, we're counting at least 100 different countries that offer citizenship and residency by investment program.
Wow.
At Henley, we have about 60 of them, and this is due to various factors. Now, often, um, depending on, of course, in terms of what is the client's budget, what are the consideration, is there a personal interest as well in wanting to have an asset in that country too? We can look at it from various perspectives. So sometimes it can be, let's say, an investment in real estate, either in commercial real estate, residential real estate. Some other times it can also be an investment directly in the financial markets, where now we're looking, depending, of course, in terms of different programs, this can vary between, let's say, 250,000 euros to all the way to about 500,000 euros. Some other times we're also looking as well to a direct donation to a country's public infrastructure, where, of
Hmm.
course, that's looking, of course, to benefit more the local communities. So through each investment, there is, of course, an economic impact, but a cultural impact that is done locally as well, which is why sometimes for some clients, there's also this emotional driver that, of course, they're getting a second citizenship. It's not just purely transactional. It's more, hey, I actually made an impact to that local community. So I actually have this personal association that I can have with that passport as well. So I hope that answered your question in some way.
Yeah, I think the ultimate takeaway there is also depending on what program you go with, depending on what your ultimate goals are, um, is going to depend on what that financial investment is going to be.
Exactly.
how long it's going to take.
Hmm.
I know that some countries take years and years to work
Hmm.
through their systems and their programs to become a full citizen, and a lot of it is some of them have a really high effort level, and some of them not as much. It
Yeah.
really is just a direct investment into the program.
Yeah.
So when you have families who are coming in who have done a little bit of research, they want to have this conversation. What are some of the I would say the filters that you're going through with them to help figure out which program might be the best fit for them, or to give
Sure.
them some options? What are some of those filters that you're going through?
Sure. Sure. So often is really to understand what are the drivers. I know I've said it a couple of times, during our conversation, but I think this is really a key importance. And the reason why is because often either let's say I have families that are reaching out to me directly or to Henley Partners, generally speaking, or let's say I work directly with the wealth managers or other representatives that work closely with the families.
Mm-hmm.
And, they'll share, of course, just general background, but then my preferred method is always to have a direct conversation with those families. And the reason why I say this is because more often than ever, one of the first questions that I always like to ask is, tell me a little bit more in terms of what is your interest to explore second citizenship or second residency, and what have been some of those concerns? And many of them, I would say 90% to 95% of the time, this is where it becomes a bit emotional. The reason why it's that a lot of them will start talking about what are the concerns, what are their drivers, and why have they thought to have this important conversation now versus maybe 4 years ago, maybe versus 12 months ago or 6 months ago. So once we have that, then of course they start opening up. It allows me to understand a bit more in terms of the family structure, understanding in terms of what is their vision over the course of the next maybe 5 to 10 years. Are they managing a business, or let's say, are they C-suite executives that are still within a young age of their career, that they're still going to put 100% of their time into the business? So then they have less time to spend in other significant countries. So now we're
Sure.
looking for specific programs that are more tailored for a more hands-off approach, allowing them to still get a citizenship without having to spend a significant amount of time. We have some other clients that they're reaching, let's say, more of their retirement age, or they have gone through an exit where now they're more interested in traveling around the world, or they want to be spending other times in the country, right? So that's an important factor as well, considering that. And then another one is also important, is also understanding in terms of what are some of the cultural assimilations that they've had if they have traveled beforehand, because that
Okay.
makes it a big impact. So
Sure.
that's one way to approach it, right? For some that they're saying, hey, listen, I think we're just mostly interested in exploring an insurance policy, having something that we can have in the back pocket, then the cultural assimilations completely change. So now we're just looking for more of a plan B, where we're then aiming for a citizenship by investment program. And in that case, we're looking for a program that may have results that could be accomplished within less than 12 months. So now those results comes down to a very short list. So of course, this is why there are so many different types of aspects of these kind of conversations that of course we can pursue, but it's important to always have the better understanding of really how those clients are really wanting to accomplish what they're asking to accomplish by getting a second citizenship or a residency.
Yeah. So, what additional, I'm going to call it due diligence or
Sure.
documentation, are you going to be looking for when you're going through this? We're calling it the client journey.
Sure.
You're trying to walk a family to get them to the best
Sure.
locations
Yeah.
that's good for them. What else are you looking for there?
Yeah, yeah. So generally within each program, I mean, of course, which is relatively new to a lot of, to a lot of these families, they'll have to go through the immigration process, right? And most of the time it can be quite challenging because there's so many different documentation to ask for. And what I like to say is that the due diligence isn't a bureaucracy, it what keeps industries credible and programs credible in terms of really having a proper passport. And the reason why is that sometimes for a lot of these different countries is they'll have these, again, depending, is they'll have these lengthy due diligence requirements that are focused in making sure that there aren't any bad actors that are being dealt with these programs, so that of course their passports can be reputable. So often within, specific due diligence processes, we'll do, like, let's say, an in-house background check, of course, making sure that of course clients are, eligible before they really financially commit. And typically what to expect with an immigration process is usually we're asking for birth certificates, marriage certificates, and most of the time it's going to be records such as education records, of course. And depending in terms of the countries, sometimes if they have relatively sensitive healthcare systems where they will mostly focus on local citizens, is they'll require a healthcare background check as well, making sure that, of course, there isn't any significant pre-existing medical conditions that can affect the sensitive healthcare system within that local country too. Of course, this is not within every single program, but that traditionally depends. So, and another important point, and that depends traditionally on the program, is that sometimes some countries is they will ask to provide an extensive amount of documentation regarding an individual's net worth. And that becomes a part of the industry credibility, of course. So different aspects, of course, in terms of how the documentation can be presented.
That's so interesting. So many of the families we work with, they are absolutely, their goal is to stay under the radar. I mean, we don't even put their names on the top of their
Sure,
financial statements.
sure.
So I think the idea for someone who's coming in to talk to you about having another citizenship outside of the U.S. to recognize going in that there's going to be a level of privacy that you are not likely going to be able to keep or hold so tightly to. You're going to have to give something depending on the country that you're trying to that you'd like to
Exactly.
have in. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think you pointed perfectly, which is depending on the country that of course we're talking about. Because of course some countries where we're looking, let's say, just at a residency program, because of course citizenship is where you become a naturalized citizen, and of course you grant similar rights as what a born person within that country may have similar rights to you. Residency,
Mm-hmm.
of course, completely differs, where it will always depend on the level of information to what a country will ask for. So, as an example, various programs, which there's one, for example, that I can think of, where in Malta, as an example, which they have a citizenship by merit program, they ask for an extensive amount of documentation that is focused on an individual's net worth. But versus some other program, as an example, where we can look into Italy, they'll ask for specific documentation that only requires to show where the source of wealth has been generated, and it can be done through, let's say, 6 months bank statement. That is more than fine, right? So that's why it traditionally depends on the given program, of course, in terms of what we're talking about, to what level of comfort, of course, would a
Right.
client be interested as well? And again, for most of these programs, to understand is that a lot of these documentation that is being shared, of course, it's being kept for a period of time, and then of course it's deleted to what countries essentially will have as to become compliant a part of these programs.
Okay. So what are some of the misconceptions that people tend to come in with when they're having this conversation with you?
Yeah, yeah,
Or the
it's a good
things that you're
question. And
like, hold on, you just said this is not a good fit. Like what those red flags, you know, it happens that you can say, hold on, let me stop you right there.
yeah, yeah. No, it's funny. It's funny. It's a fun question to ask, to answer, and the reason why is because I hear so many different, so many different ways, so many different things that a client will come to us and often ask about specific things. Where sometimes we'll hear, how fast can I get a second citizenship, or how easy is it as well, and I just want to do this for tax purposes, or would a passport solve everything, right? Sometimes, of course, either it's that they have either they had already a conversation and there's been some unrealistic timelines of specific programs that were not given right. Either it's also been a, a not a proper due diligence in terms of clarifying the goals that one client may have. Another factor I would say is really avoiding some of the motivations that clients are not willing to share. which really makes the advisory process quite hard on our end. So then we're not really able to give specific ideas on what we can provide and everything else. And what we have to do is we always have to really paint a picture well towards a client in terms of setting those realistic expectations. And the reason why is that sometimes clients will come as they're extremely emotional, either about a specific event that has happened and that has triggered them to really open that conversation to us, or sometimes because this has been a, a ball that has kind of rolled over a significant period of time and it led to them to this specific instant of this conversation wanting to have something by tomorrow. But of course, for each of these given conversations, it's always a question of really setting the expectations, understanding in terms of really what a client wants, so that we can then share exactly what can be delivered. And sometimes, if a client is aiming for a specific program that has not really set their expectations in terms of timelines, we can always try to look at another solution. So often, a strategy that I share is we can aim in terms of a short-term solution and a long-term solution.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, we can aim for, as often, a Caribbean citizenship and investment program, which often will have a 6-month timeline, delivering a second citizenship, which is often a quick pathway to an insurance policy for a plan B. And then we can aim, let's say, for a residency in New Zealand, as an example, which often has this cultural assimilation, of course, with the US, has a similar judicial system in terms of the British Commonwealth, and so forth and on. And that will take about a year or so, right? So it's really in terms of really setting those realistic expectations for some of the clients that they have. That often, again, it requires a bit of this education that we have to always bring to a client and everything else.
Sure. And or re-education sometimes,
Yes.
as it were.
Yeah, exactly. Perfectly said. Perfectly said. Yeah.
Okay, so Simon, I'm guessing the big question on everybody's mind, it's certainly the question that I hear a lot. If I'm a US born citizen, I have a US passport, and I'm looking into Plan B or getting citizenship or residency in another country, do I have to give up my US passport and my US
Yeah.
citizenship?
Yeah, that's a good question. And often we have a lot of clients that ask this question, which I don't think it's very common knowledge. And what I would say is the answer is yes. And since the late 1900s, the US has essentially allowed for American families to have dual nationalities,
Okay. So you
either
don't have
through
to give it up, potentially.
you don't. So you do not have to renounce.
Okay.
You always have the right to have dual citizenship. And that is if, as an example, we have, let's say, families that are coming to the US and they're getting US citizenship, they can keep their passport from where they come from, or sometimes they acquire it by ancestry. So their family came from, let's say, post World War One or post World War Two to the US, and they have the right to essentially claim citizenship. So they can still have their US citizenship and their citizenship by descent passport, if I can call it its way, from, again, wherever they come from, or through citizenship by investment as well. Yeah.
Okay. So you can have dual. You can actually have more than two, generally speaking.
Hmm.
Is there a reason is there a financial reason, or I don't know, is there a reason or a time at which you might recommend someone give up one citizenship versus another?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Often, what we're seeing, especially not just in the US, but more internationally, is we're seeing that there are political shifts and geopolitical and risks that are happening internationally. Not just in the US, we're seeing either tax reforms that are happening, as an example, in the UK, tax
Mm-hmm.
reforms that are also happening in the US, or sometimes we're seeing also political shifts that are happening, let's say, in ongoing elections that are happening, let's say, in South America. So, what we're always sharing with clients is that conversations that we're having now about a specific program either can sometimes change over the course of the future for various reasons. And the reason that essentially we may sometimes talk about having multiple citizenships is creating an insurance policy not just within one specific jurisdiction, but essentially really covering in terms of uncertainties that may be happening around the world that at least this insurance policy can carry by having another citizenship within another jurisdiction. So often what we'll be talking about is either having a residency within another country or having another citizenship within another country,
Mm-hmm.
and that typically will always depend. So it's always within the realm of that specific factor.
Okay. Interesting. Are there, so I have a couple of questions that I want to make sure that I ask you. One is, are there any trends that are happening that families should be aware of, that advisors should be aware of whenever they're having conversations with a family about doing something internationally?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, and I'll develop my answer within a couple of key points. Now, what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of countries where programs that have started maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago have more laxed rules, where it gave them an opportunity to, have, of course, an investor or their family come through these programs, but they wouldn't request a significant amount of documentation. Nowadays, of course, there is a significant pressure, not just coming from the US, but also that is coming from the European Union Commission and other countries as well, where they want to make sure that there are specific guidelines and specific due diligence requirements that are done to make sure that whoever really applies for these programs, there is a due diligence that is done not just from a background check, mostly on the criminal side of things, but also on the financial side of things, right? So there's no white collar crime, if I can put it this way. So
Yep.
what we're seeing right now is, globally speaking, there are tighter regulations that are growing a part of different countries, where some of them will essentially they will increase thresholds out of different investment options, of course, depending on the given program, because of course they want to make sure that the families that are, of course, able to financially benefit from them can come from, legitimate sources. So that's one thing. What we're also seeing nowadays is that there are higher due diligence standards. And this is something that we're seeing traditionally through various programs. And the reason why is, again, falling again on the principle of having a bad actor. And this is mainly focused on the credibility of specific program. Another as well, and this is more focused on timelines, is the increase of interest for American families. One interesting statistic that I often like to share, which I think it's quite significant, a part of considering in terms of why we've we've seen this especially happening from the interest of the U.S. market. We've seen that essentially U.S. nationals in 2025 have exceeded all uh, nationalities that we've had by at least 77%. Another interesting factor that I like to share is that maybe approximately about 5 years ago, the US market, or maybe about 10 years ago, the US market was about 4% of our market share internationally.
Hmm.
Today, it's about 40% of our market share, surprisingly enough.
Wow.
And the US US nationals to be more specific, have grown to be the number one nationality to ask for a second citizenship or a residency. So
Hmm.
because of this increase of demand, what we're seeing is also increase of interest, of course, but also increase of timelines that are being done within other programs. And sometimes what we're seeing is either programs are changing thresholds. So often people will try to rush in order to take advantage. It's like, for example, if you're going through Black Friday and you're getting a discount, right? A bit of the same concept,
You
right?
gotta
But
get in under the deadline.
exactly, right? But through that specific factor, sometimes programs will essentially have delays within their application. So sometimes we'll speak about a program that can take up to 6 months, and then families decide to move forward within about 12. Then unfortunately, now we're seeing an increase of delays that can happen as well. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I would say also is we're seeing a transition nowadays within the traditional citizenship by investment or residency by investment. So the investment by merit, so the investment basis type of program. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing a trend of countries that traditionally, since many, many years, countries have had this type of rule within their constitution, where we're seeing a lot of programs that are coming up as merit-based programs, and talent-based program that are really rising. And the reason why is because we're seeing countries that they really want to attract what I like to say in French, la crème de la crème, which is really the top of having individuals that have really succeeded within, their industries or their family businesses, or sometimes we're not always focused with, the ultra high net worth and the high net worth individual that have succeeded well, but we'll look also in terms of entrepreneurs or entertainers, but also sports individuals that have achieved very well that can bring this cultural impact into a country. So sometimes countries will have lower thresholds, but then they will still grant citizenship and residency of that specific aspect as well. So
Hmm.
that's
Interesting.
uh, that's really a big trend that we're seeing right now. We're part of an industry that is changing, where a lot of our clients that didn't think they could take advantage of that, just based on their background and their success and everything else, have heavily taken advantage of that now, and this has completely changed the game within the investment migration industry.
That's so cool. So, something you and I have talked about before is
Mm,
the strength of passports, or the passport rankings, and sometimes being, I think, another reason that someone might want another passport to be able to get to different countries that you can't get to from your home country. Just as a kind of a quick headline, uh, give us a little bit of information about how countries' passports strengthen and weaken, and
sure.
um, yeah.
Yeah. No, we definitely dive quite deep into the discussion. So often what we're seeing, and this is not something that really we have within our knowledge on a day-to-day basis, is that often, within the elected governments that of course we have in office, are the ones that are generally maintaining friendly relationships with other countries. So often we'll hear about foreign relationships or foreign policies that are of course applied and everything else. And sometimes for various reasons, these friendly relationships can be bad or sometimes it can be good, right? And that, of course, depends on either some of these policies that essentially our country is looking to essentially benefit from versus another country that they're looking to their own benefits as well. So often what we're seeing is that if, let's say, an elected government have friendly relationships with another country, then they will essentially offer what we call a visa-free access so that its citizen can essentially travel to the country without applying for a visa. And in other cases, whenever we're seeing that unfortunate relationships within that aspects are not working, then unfortunately visa-free access gets cut off. Here at Henley Partners, for I would say about 20 years, we've had what we call our Henley Passport ranking, which essentially we rank about 199 different passports or different countries internationally, going from top all the way to bottom. And we've always seen that essentially there's been always a selective about I would say top 5 to 10 different countries that have always been, of course, first world countries such as European countries, the US, Canada as well, and other countries that often we'll heavily speak about. And what we're seeing is that over the course of the last maybe 20 to 30 years, we've seen that often a lot of these relationships for countries' interests, of course, economic interest and so forth and on, or political shifts may affect the strength of one's passport in terms of traveling to this other country as well.
So we're gonna post a link to your website in the show notes, and to one to your homepage, but another specifically
Hmm.
to this passport rankings. I just felt like I thought it was so interesting when I was going through it, and able to see over time how strong, for example, the US passport was, and how
Hmm.
it has ebbed and flowed over time, and the countries, the smaller countries that really people didn't travel to and didn't have good foreign relationship policies with other countries 20, 30, 40 years ago have really, it's very clear that they are working on their foreign policy, because they have skyrocketed from a very, very small amount of countries that you can travel to without a visa to now ranking right up there with some of the bigger countries like the US and Europe and Canada. I just thought it was
Yeah.
so interesting. And just a note, if you're traveling, whether you're looking for to get a citizenship or a residency in another country, I think what struck me is it's always changing. I mean,
Yeah,
some of those are standards. U.S. citizens traveling to Europe or Germany or Canada, like some of those are long-standing and hopefully not changing. But if you're traveling, if you're planning to travel to a smaller country or somewhere outside of the big ones that everybody knows of, you
sure,
probably ought to check
sure.
into it to make sure that you don't need a visa based on the passport that you have.
Of course, 100%. And
Yeah.
often what I'll say is we've had of course various client cases where, I can share a client experience where we had a family that essentially had a manufacturing business in the US that was focused on polyester. And to essentially of course benefit from cheaper manufacturing, they also had, partners in China. As an example, we're talking maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And for this family to keep what we tend to call in our industry their global mobility access. So it's really offering them the freedom of access within different countries versus applying for a visa. They essentially saw that the US foreign policies and China's were completely shifted from one year to the other, and of course, through different elections and so forth and on. And they were really aiming at looking at a second program to a country that had already friendly relationships with China and could offer them visa-free access without applying for a visa, of course, going through the whole paperwork and so forth and on, would maybe about 6 months or so before getting the visa, of course, allowing them to travel to the country. So they ended up doing a citizenship by investment program in the Caribbean, specifically in Grenada, which offers them visa-free access directly to China. So they can leave from a US passport, travel directly, let's say, to Canada, which may have direct flights to Hong Kong, as an example, let's say, or from another U.S. airport, and then they can, as they arrive, they can present their Grenada passport and offer them visa-free access,
Wow.
as an example, or they can land directly in Shanghai or something. Of course, that's one specific client case,
Sure.
but what we're seeing as well within a part of the trends is we're seeing growing concerns of families to travel with a U.S. passport nowadays. And the reason why it's, of course, due to ongoing political shifts that are happening in the US, especially the trade war and everything else, where now these families, what they're seeing is they're seeing that essentially once they present their US passport, they have a fear either to ask them for another visa that essentially they have to present while they're traveling to the US. May Europe grant other restrictions for US nationals to travel to other countries, right? And so forth and on.
Right.
And the reason why I say this is because, to bring a point, we've seen that essentially the US passport, and just to bring back another point that you were saying, is that the US passport has always been a very strong passport. If we're looking over the course of the last maybe 10 years or so, or even 20 years, the US passport has always been a part of the five strongest passports to be ranked in the world. But starting in 2015, 2014, we've seen that essentially the US passport has slowly but surely started degrading and going down within our rankings. And within the first quarter of this year, the last quarter of this year, we've seen that essentially the US passport has gone down, surprisingly enough, under the 10th ranking. And other countries, like in Europe, even Canada and everything else, are still significant passports to hold. And as we're seeing this, and this is again due to political shifts that are happening, we're sharing, of course, this education to a lot of clients that sometimes it gives them a different perspective on how they should be considering a second citizenship and for the families as well. So this is something interesting, of course, that, often you can share, of course, with your audience, but this is ongoing rankings and events that are happening nowadays that are happening, of course, over us that are shifting in terms of the
Right.
strength of our own passports to what we can do today.
Just as another country, we can decide to not have visa free access to let another country's citizens in. They
Hmm.
they get to reciprocate and they get to say we're not going to let a U.S. citizen in visa free.
Of course. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just so
Exactly.
it's just it's incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Um, the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Well said.
Simon, thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. I sincerely hope that anyone who's listening pulled out a few nuggets are going to hop on your website and take a look at the visa page to be able to see the strength and where all you can go with the different passports, because it really is fascinating. Any last thoughts or anything that you would want people to know before we close out today?
Yeah, I think with ongoing discussions that a lot of families are having nowadays, one thing that I will share is do not, again, especially for advisors, is do not be fearful of asking your clients regarding what are the concerns. Even if they know, they should essentially be able to offer the opportunity to talk about a second citizenship and a second residency. And the reason why I say this is because often when we talk about financial management, of course, succession planning and everything else, we're very focused on the capital side of things. But a citizenship and a residency falls very much on personalized freedom, in addition to, of course, accessing other markets for asset protection and so forth and on. But to never really be fearful of asking these questions and opening that discussion with these families, because sometimes they want to open up and have those discussions with friends, their advisors, and so forth and on. And often I hear it coming from different advisors in the family office world. So, really, one of the last things that I want to share before we end.
Perfect. And I will add it just as a side note, if you as a family or you're an advisor to a family who is interested in having these conversations, this is not a conversation to just have with any legal counsel. This is probably not a conversation to have with your estate planning attorney or your business attorney or your tax attorney. This is a conversation to have with legal counsel who focuses specifically on international citizenship and residency programs, because they're going to be the ones who are able to give you the best and most current guidance. Talk to them first, and then bring in your tax and business and estate planning folks, because that is definitely a much bigger conversation. If you are thinking about changing residency or adding residency or having property in another country, that has to be addressed in your estate planning, and it is going to have some tax implications most likely on some level. So there's a lot that goes into these conversations, but if you want to get it started, go to the folks that can give you the most current information first, so then the rest of your conversations are productive conversations. You're not having to go back and rehab them because you learned new information the second time rather than the first time around.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Simon, thank you again so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Christi.
Link to your website, of course, and your email and LinkedIn, so folks can get in touch with you to continue having and or start a conversation. So,
Of course. Thank you again for the invite. This was great.
absolutely. Have a great day. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the Family Office Success Podcast. I hope you found this conversation insightful and valuable as you navigate the complexities of family office services. If you're looking for more ideas or resources, or want to explore how we can support your family office or your family through services and training and strategy, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at whiteriverconsultants.com, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates and expert insights. And if you're ready to take your family office to the next level, consider joining our mastermind, where we can help you manage that chaos and create better outcomes for the families you serve. Until next time, I'm Christi Van Rite, and this has been the Family Office Success Podcast. Take care and keep building for the future.